Hi guys, Squirrel here, and welcome to another episode of Kerbal Space Program. It has been a little while since I've done one of these, and you may notice a change in this rocket. Yeah, it's quite a bit different. So if you remember, the previous rocket had the same centerpiece, the same main column, but it had two solid rocket boosters, one on either side. I had to ditch that design. Basically, it was okay for what I was using it for. It's okay for fairly lightweight loads, but it's not okay for what I'm carrying today, which is a fuel tank. They're quite heavy, and it just wouldn't lift it. So what I've done is modified the design. Now I'm just going to take you through some of the changes I've made, and then we'll have a look at the payload. So we've got a large fuel can and a small fuel can on the side, and a rocket down the bottom. Obviously we've got 4 of these. Now the staging is important. We've got what they call the asparagus staging style, which is basically a fuel feed. So what happens is this tank here is feeding into this one, and then this one is feeding into the main tank. You can see that via the fuel line. And then the same thing happens on this one. This feeds into this one, and then this one feeds into the center. So what happens is, and you'll see that in a sec anyway when I show the launch, the opposite tanks, these drain more quickly because they're pumping fuel into these tanks here, and these are pumping fuel into the middle. So these outer ones will drop, then we'll drop these other outer ones, and then we'll just be left with a center one with a buttload of fuel because the others have been pumping into it. That's a particular style called asparagus staging. Now the other thing we've got, which you may notice, is these wings. These are there to give a lot of stability, actually, control surfaces. So there's a set of 4 of these. And the final thing down here, just that little thing there, the little RCS thruster. There's an RCS thruster there and an RCS thruster at the top, and some RCS pods with some fuel in them. Now, the reason I've got that is, as you'll see when I launch, I get into orbit and I need to maneuver this rocket because I've got some juice left, and I don't want to just waste it. So I use the the fuel that's remaining to create almost an orbit before I then ditch it and allow the whole main section to fall back into Kerbin. It made sense to basically use that fuel rather than just use the fuel in the payload. So what is the payload? Well, if we just take this away for a second, essentially that is what will detach and fall back to Kerbin, and this is what will remain minus this little this is a separator unit as well. So when we activate that into staging, that will fall away, and we'll be left with pretty much this minus the outer casing. So the casing falls off along with that, basically. Now let's just get rid of this stuff so we can see what's going on. Essentially, that is what we're going to get left with. You've got a fuel can, you've got 4 little engines on there. I even put some parachutes on here because I've been nice and friendly with recycling components. So when this thing falls back, what I'll do is I'll deorbit this. So I've stuck a control unit there so that I can actually take control of this once it's separated from the payload. So the payload has got a control unit on top, and all the payload is essentially a very, very large fuel can and a whole buttload of RCS as well. Okay, with some RCS thrusters, but lots of little RCS fuel tanks going on, and a docking point there. So we're going to attach it to the main space station. RCS thrusters top and bottom, and if we just turn on the center of mass, if you got rid of this, the center of mass is roughly here. So what happens is that the final detachment is this releases from the payload, and the payload itself is completely controllable because of that control unit right there. So I can take control of this, and with the RCS fuel and thrusters I can maneuver it, dock it into position. So I get in within about 50 meters of the space station and then dock this into the space station. I then take control of this aircraft because again it has its own control unit. This will have some fuel left. I can then use it to deorbit this and bring it back down to Kerbin, activate the parachutes and land it. That's the theory anyway. The rest essentially is the delivery vehicle. Now the only thing to note of interest is that's the docking point though, which is the let's just have a look, is the standard utilities. This one, the Clampertron docking port, that one there. That's what I've been going with so far, but on the bottom here you'll notice on the second page over here, I think it's on the second page, sorry, it's not the second page, it's this one, it's the senior docking port. It's the huge one. It's bigger, much easier to dock into, but it has a bit less magnetic force about it. I've put this on the outside just to add a bit of variety to it, essentially. And so the outside of these tanks will have the large docking point, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on. But that is essentially the rocket we're going to take off with. Let's see in action, shall we? Right, so here we are on the launch pad. Time to bring up some MechJeb windows, just to help with the launch. First thing we're going to bring up is the Ascent guidance. I'm going to set that to, let's say, go for 180 kilometers. No, let's go for 200 approximately. It doesn't really matter. We're going to go for something high, and you'll see why in a little while. Click on show, and that will bring the purple thing on the nav ball. Orbit info is very useful because it shows apo and peri-apsis, and surface info also gives you a bit of information that's quite useful. And that's enough. So let's throttle up, hit spacebar, and let's go for a takeoff. Don't need that. Now I'm not going to use the auto SAS by pressing the T key because I found that all it really does is make the control surfaces flap around. So I'm going to do it manually. As long as I've got the wings, that tends to be quite stable. Keep your eye on the engine overheat there. I'm just going to throttle down a little bit. So what I tend to do is max the throttle up, and then just when it gets to the point of overheating, just throttle it down a little bit. Once you get near about 140 meters per second, that should be fine to hold it at about 80 to 90% power. You can see how quickly those outer tanks emptied. So I've jettisoned those with the spacebar. And just on the bottom left though, you can see the second set of tanks are depleting quicker than the main tank in the middle, because they're feeding fuel to the engine and fuel to the main tank. That's basically the reason. So we've just ditched a lot of weight. And pretty soon when we hit about 12,000 meters, we should start making our turn towards the east, and that'll be about the time when we're going to release the second set of tanks. And you'll see just how much fuel we have left. I mean, we've got, what's that, 2/3 of a tank right now? Loads of fuel, and we're already 10,000 meters up. I don't believe they actually use this kind of asparagus staging technique, as it's called. I don't believe it's actually used in the real world, because it is actually very difficult and dangerous. But it's fine in Kerbal Space Program. Difficult and dangerous is what we do. Out goes the outer tanks. I'm now pressing the D key and heading towards the east. Just trying to keep my vector towards that magenta circle, which is the Ascent guidance circle. You don't need MechJeb. You can actually just do this manually. It's fine. Look at the orbit info. You can see that our apoapsis is 25k, 26k. I don't actually need to bring up the map when I've got that information. You normally need to bring up the map and just see where your apo is going to be, but with MechJeb you got the information at hand, so that's kind of handy. It means I can stay in the screen. Now for some reason I've noticed when we get to around 50k, a weird thing happens. It's as if there's a shift in the physics in Kerbal. And you'll notice the rocket then just suddenly starts to twist, to turn, and I have no idea why. It's not like there's any atmosphere up there. And we're getting pretty high now. There's hardly any atmosphere left, but it just starts to turn. I just generally either I tried fighting it, but sometimes I just allow it to happen. As long as my yellow circle, which is my vector, my direction, the direction my rocket is going, as long as that is aiming roughly towards that magenta circle, it doesn't really matter. It's just a coordination thing. Instead of pressing D to go to the right on the nav ball, when it starts to turn around, I might have to press S or W. Yeah, it's just an acquired skill, but I've still no idea why it happens. Like I say, I think it's just the way Kerbal's there you go, it's doing it now. Can you see it? It's just starting to turn. So that means instead of pressing the A and D keys, I'm now having to press the W and S keys in order to move the vector of the rocket down. Really strange. Anyway, apoapsis is now 120, and you can see how much fuel we've got left. We've got quite a bit, enough to help us get into an orbit. We could use that fuel to get into a complete orbit if you want to, but I don't want to do that. I'm just going to kill the thrust now. That's 184. That's absolutely fine. That's a good 80 kilometers above the space station. As you can see, the apoapsis really high. Anything, I mean 200, 220, it's all good. The idea is to give us quite a dissimilar orbit to the space station to do an easier transfer. Now we bring up the maneuver planner, and I'm going to tell it to circularize at the apoapsis. So just creating a maneuver, but I'm not going to completely circularize. I could. I have enough fuel to do it, but I'm not going to, because if I did that, then when I jettison this main delivery vehicle, it won't deorbit, it won't fall back down, it'll stay up there flying around Kerbin and be really annoying. This is why I put the RCS thrusters on, because now I just need to use them to turn this thing. It's quite a heavy vehicle and it doesn't turn very easily without the RCS, so just stuck it on there and it helps. Once I get into position, there's the blue circle there, that's the maneuver node. We've got a few minutes before we reach that, so we've got plenty of time. One little trick that I've learned actually is if you start maneuvering with RCS, when it hits that blue point there, instead of trying to slow the rocket's turning motion down, actually what you can do is just press the full stop key and then the comma key quickly. So what that does is accelerates time and then stops it immediately. And that, what happens is Kerbal then disables the rotational physics. The net effect of that is it just makes your rocket stop moving. It's actually quite handy. It's a bit of a cheat in many ways, because I don't have to use RCS fuel to slow down the turning of my rocket, but it works. It works in KSP. So you'll see me use it in a second. I'm just going to aim up towards that maneuver node. Struggling slightly because this thing is so bloody heavy. There you go. You see I just used it then, just to kill my maneuver. It says time warp 1 times, so I'll do it again, move up towards the node. I'm almost there. And there you go. Just full stop and then comma, which is time warp and then time warp cancel. And that's it. Easy way to use no RCS fuel to kill the rotation of your rocket. Just got to wait until we get round to the maneuver node and then we can throttle up. So let's accelerate time. Don't want to go too quickly. Be careful you don't shoot past, of course. So easily done. As I often say, when you're about to do a maneuver, press F5 and do a quick save. If it all goes horribly wrong, hold down the F9 key, reload it back in, try again. We're not NASA scientists. We do get to reload things when they go wrong, so take advantage of the fact. Okay, we're at T minus 20 seconds. What I'm going to do is I'm going to throttle up and then keep my eye on the periapsis. You see on the orbit info? Periapsis, I don't want it to come up to more than about 70k, which is about the limit of Kerbin's atmosphere. So I want it to stay under 70k and then I will detach the main vehicle. And that means that the main vehicle will still have some atmosphere to hit, which will cause it to deorbit. You see the blue circle, periapsis is coming up. It's still negative at the moment, still within Kerbin, minus 16k. Just adjust the rocket slightly and then we can throttle up again. Okay, there it is. 20k, 30k. I could do more. I could probably bring it to more or less 50, but it doesn't matter. Spacebar, okay, that's actually detached. There you go. That detached the main vehicle and the aerodynamic covers. And as I showed you earlier, we're now left with the payload and the delivery vehicle. Sorry, the payload and the orbiting vehicle, I should say. So what I'm going to do is circularize with this. So I'm going to say circularize from now, quickly move. This is a lot easier to turn, much lighter vehicle. Spin it round to that maneuver node, throttle up, and circularize the orbit. Don't have to be deadly accurate, just bring up the periapsis to roughly 180. On 72. Should we go for a bit more? Yeah, let's get a bit closer to 180. Still got a difference of 7 kilometers. It doesn't really matter, but the perfectionist in me just wants to just wants to bring it up to 180. Some people are like that. I'm one of them. There we go. That'll do. It's within a couple of K. Who cares? Right. Delete the maneuver node. So what's happening is this. We're now in a roughly 80 kilometer higher orbit than the space station we're trying to reach. Those bits down there, they're going to deorbit. They'll just go around the back of Kerbal, fall in. We won't see them again. What we now need to do is just kill my rotation with the smart ass or smart ASS. The smart ass. Just kill the rotation with that. And essentially what we're going to do now is do what's called a Hohmann transfer or a Hoffman transfer, depending on how you pronounce it. So we need to set the space station as the target. I'm just going to check my alignments. So the one thing you want to do now is line up your plane with the space station so that it's pretty close as it is. But I think we're going to basically align it up. So bring up the rendezvous planner, click on align planes. You can of course just do this manually. I'm just using MechJeb to do the maths, but I'm actually going to do the maneuver myself. So you can see it's created a maneuver node, which basically, usual story, fly around to the maneuver node, point in the direction of the blue thing, burn it for, in this case, 2 seconds, and that will align our planes. Couldn't be easier. There we go, ready for the burn, and just make that little burn there, that'll do, it's pretty accurate. There you go. That'll do absolutely fine. So, we are now coplanar with the space station. The next thing is to use the the rendezvous planner, click on intercept with Hoffman transfer. What that's going to do is calculate, because we're in a different orbit to the space station is going around in a lower orbit, which means it's going around more quickly. So what that does is it calculates when we can affect a maneuver which will bring our periapsis down so that when we get around to our periapsis, we'll intercept or be very, very close to the space station. Now, you can do this manually, as I say, but literally MechJeb goes, bang, there's the math for it. Get to here, burn for this many seconds, that'll bring your peri down. It's effectively a retrograde burn, brings the peri down, as you can see. And then you get these kind of red markers which show you your intersection. That's the closest point where you're going to be at the space station. At that point, we need to go manual and start doing some jiggery-pokery. And I'll show you how to do that. But MechJeb just makes this part a lot easier. Otherwise, you have to kind of use a bit of guesswork and a bit of experience to do it. So here we are. We're a little bit further on. We've gone round the... We've orbited the planet a few times. The space station is now on an inner orbit has caught us up. You can see what's going to happen now. As we get over to this maneuver node, which I'm currently squarely aimed at, and we've got T-minus 20 seconds. We're going to burn for 4 seconds, and you will see that we'll collapse our periapsis, which is roughly on the other side. There we go. So it's bringing the peri down now. The peri should come to roughly where the orbit of the space station is, which is going to be roughly about 100 and so K. You can see it's currently on 111 K. Now, if we just kind of spin around, you can see that's going to give us an intersection just here. It says about 0.5 kilometer at the closest difference of separation, but that's assuming that we burned that maneuver node spot on, which we didn't. But it's close enough. I'm going to go with that. Let's speed up time now and we shall see what happens. So essentially what's going to happen is our vehicle is going to orbit around. The space station is going to catch up with us and we'll meet or be very close to at this intersection point. So here we are. Space station and rocket about to intersect with each other at roughly 6 kilometers. Anything less would be good, but, you know, there it is. It's currently 12 kilometers away, so we need to speed up time just a little bit to try and get near that 6K mark, but I'm going to point myself round, so I'm roughly aiming towards the space station. Now, the important number here is just above the nav ball. It's the speed to the target. You're going to use this an awful lot when you start docking. Essentially what you're going to end up doing, roughly, is this. You're going to point towards the space station, accelerate, then turn yourself around so that your retrograde is pointing at the space station. And as you get close, you're going to brake to bring the target speed down so that you slow yourself right down so you're not moving that quickly relative to the space station. Then you're going to point to the space station again, accelerate towards it, turn around and brake when you get near it. You're going to keep doing this until you get within about 50 meters of it. At that point, we'll then jettison the delivery vehicle. We'll deorbit it later, but we'll then use just the payload with those RCS thrusters, and we'll use that to dock. That's basically the plan, and you'll see me execute that now. Right, 7k away, so I'm going to accelerate towards the space station. We're doing 100 meters per second. Now, you think about that. 100 meters per second in 10 seconds time I'll have travelled 1 kilometer. So given that I'm 5k away, I've got 50 seconds maximum to turn this thing around. Try and do a little bit of mental maths when you do that to make sure you don't pick up too much speed that you can't rotate. So now I'm pointing away from it, so you can see the yellow retrograde. That's a retrograde relative to that target. So I'm going to basically wait until this thing starts to pass under us. We're not in an exact orbit with it, so we just need to get close enough. And when we get to roughly our closest point, we're going to brake by thrusting in our retrograde. You see that now. So I'm just starting to... There we go. We're collapsing the speed. You can see it's slowing down relative to us. You've got to chase that retrograde symbol a little bit, though. It does tend to move around because, as I say, we're not in the same orbit. So we're actually heading in different directions. It's very hard to see this in space, but we're heading in a different direction to the space station. So when we start to slow down, we're still moving, but we're moving in a different direction. So 2.4 meters, it's fine. Let's point around to the target again, and we'll aim towards it. Thrust a bit. Now, we're only 1.6k, so I don't want to get too fast this time. You can make big mistakes when you do this. If you get a little bit too keen, start aiming towards the space station, think, oh, we can fly down there at 50 meters per second, and you don't get a chance to turn around, and you've shot right past it, or you hit the damn thing. That's the worst thing. So there we go. I'm going to thrust up. 50 meters per second will do. Even that's quite quick. As you can see, we're closing in really fast. I'm not even halfway around the nav ball. I may have overshot this. Okay, we're nearly there, nearly there, nearly there. Okay, time warp to kill that rotation. And then we're going to thrust until the target is on 0. There we go. So, as you can see, I was on the limit there. I almost overshot. Thankfully, I didn't. Just going to kill the rest of that speed. You can see I'm chasing this thing, chasing that vector around the nav ball. Now, we are 0.6 meters per second, so that's good. We're in a fairly stable orbit now. As you do this, essentially you're closing your orbit in more and more accurately towards the space station. So it will start to behave itself a little bit more. It'll start to be chasing it a lot less. Now, I'm only 200 meters away. We are really close to the space station now. You've got to be careful. It's at this point that I'd recommend you press F5 and do a quick save. Just checking how much propellant I've got left. Now, don't forget, I've got lots of propellant, lots of RCS, but I need plenty of RCS to make the final docking, so I don't want to use it all thrusting around, rotating around. 5 meters per second. Patience is the key now. 5 meters per second is not a lot. It means we're going to have to wait a little bit, but that's fine. I'd rather play it safe. Rather than just holding down the RCS and using fuel, just let the thing spin around. Time warp to kill that rotation. And when we get within about 50 meters, I'm going to thrust Now this is where you need to be very gentle. Just touch it now, because a couple of meters per second is very easy to shift with those thrusters. The closer to zero that you get, the better. You can see that I've already put one tank on. What I didn't tell you was, I already put one tank on. This is actually the second tank. I thought it would be more interesting to show the second tank rather than just the first one, because you can get a sense of what I'm trying to do. Essentially, I'm building a circle of 4 fuel tanks. That's what I'm trying to do. So we are 0.1 meters per second away. We're in a good orbit. Unfortunately, we are now heading over to the dark side of the planet, which just makes it much more difficult to dock. It's very difficult to dock at night. I do dock the third part that way, but like I say, it's not easy. So I'm going to time shift, bring it round to the daylight, but obviously that 0.1 meters per second adds up, and now we are 100 meters away again. So we've got a little bit of thrusting back towards the space station to do, but rather do that than dock at night, because it is so much more difficult. So again, no difference. Point towards the space station, thrust, aim for the retrograde brake, and get back. And here we are, 40 meters away, just slowing down now, making that final adjustment, chasing the vector. Unfortunately, you do use quite a bit of RCS when you do this. So delicate. 0.4 is like tap the shift key, then tap the control key really quickly. 0.1, that's really good. I'm happy with that. We're moving around into daylight, so as you can see, we can see plenty anyway. We can see enough of what's going on to make a dock. So it is now time to get rid of that delivery vehicle. Again, we're going to deorbit that later, but making sure it's pointing away from the space station before I actually make the detach move. It will give us a little bit of force towards the space station, but the main thing is those thrusters, that rocket's going to go the other way. There you go. That's a good clean separation. So now we are left with the final dock. Unfortunately, we're out of time. I'm going to have to cut it here. I'm really sorry, but the video length is coming up for 30 minutes, so I shall quickly put out the next video, and in that video I shall show you me docking this piece and the final 2 pieces, and you'll see the whole thing in all of its glory. Until then, take care guys, and happy trekking!